The late afternoon sun hung low over the Wyoming territory, painting the endless expanse of sagebrush and rock in shades of amber and rust. A dry wind swept across the barren landscape, carrying with it the taste of dust and the promise of another scorching day. In the distance, the Laramie Mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks blurred by a haze that softened the line between earth and sky. Samuel Thornton urged his bay stallion forward, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite the weariness weighing on his shoulders. At 42, he cut an imposing figure against the vastness of the frontier, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair and deep lines etched around eyes the color of winter ice. His fine wool coat and well-made boots marked him as a man of means, but there was something in his bearing that spoke of burdens carried too long, of a soul that had forgotten how to rest. The Thornton Ranch sprawled across 20,000 acres of prime grazing land, making him one of the wealthiest men in the territory. His cattle numbered in the thousands. His horses were the finest bloodstock west of the Mississippi. His bank accounts in Cheyenne could have bought him a life of ease in any eastern city. Yet here he rode, alone as always, returning from another bitter meeting with the railroad men who wanted to drive their tracks straight through the heart of his land. The wind shifted. Samuel's horse snorted and tossed its head, ears pricking forward. Years on the frontier had taught him to trust the instincts of an animal long before his own. He reined in, scanning the barren landscape. Nothing moved, only a hawk circling high overhead and a tumbleweed skittering across the hard-packed earth. Then he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the wind itself. A low, broken moan carried across the plains. Samuel's hand went instinctively to the Colt, 45 at his hip. Out here, miles from the nearest settlement, such sounds rarely meant anything good. Bandits, outlaws, or worse prowled these lonely stretches, waiting for the unwary. Yet something in that voice tugged at him, something that stirred an old memory of a cry for help he had once failed to answer. He guided his horse toward the sound. A half-collapsed cabin came into view, hidden behind a cluster of dying cottonwoods. The roof sagged, the door hung loose on its hinges, and what remained of the windows gaped like empty eyes. It was the kind of place decent men avoided, a haven for drifters or the dead. The sound came again, clearer now, a muffled sob of distress. Samuel dismounted, drawing his pistol in one smooth motion. His boots crunched softly on the dirt as he stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and something darker that made his stomach turn. Dust motes floated in the dim light, streaming through cracks in the wall. Then he saw her. In the far corner lay a young woman bound hand and foot, a filthy strip of burlap tied cruelly across her mouth. Her dress, once a modest blue calico, was torn and stained with dirt and dried blood. Her dark hair hung in matted tangles across her face, wide, terrified eyes fixed on him with a mixture of hope and dread. Samuel holstered his weapon and dropped to his knees beside her, working at the knots that held her wrists. She flinched away, a strangled sound escaping from behind the gag. "Easy now," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The rope around her wrists came loose. The moment she was free, she clawed at the gag, but her shaking hands fumbled. "Let me," Samuel said quietly, reaching behind her head. The burlap was wet with tears and blood, the knot pulled so tight it took him several tries to loosen. When he finally freed it, he pulled the cloth away gently. The girl gasped. Her chest heaved as she drew in ragged breaths. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. Her first words came out as a broken whisper that cut straight through him. "I can't breathe." Samuel froze, the words slamming into him like a physical blow. For an instant, he wasn't in that ruined shack. He was back in another house years ago. His wife and daughter trapped inside, smoke thick in the air, their cries echoing through the flames. He had been too late then. Not this time. He forced the memory down and focused on the girl. "You're safe now," he said firmly, cutting the ropes at her ankles. "Can you sit up?" She nodded weakly. He steadied her as she tried to rise. Up close, he could see the full extent of her injuries. Bruises, in varying shades of blue and purple, raw rope burns, and the hollow look of someone who hadn't eaten in days. "Water," she croaked. Samuel pulled his canteen from his saddlebag and held it to her lips. "Slowly," he warned. She drank greedily, then looked up at him through tear-rimmed lashes. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 2 days, maybe 3. I lost track. Her voice was hoarse, each word an effort. "Who did this to you?" At that, fear flooded her features. "They'll come back," she whispered. "They always come back." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Not while I'm here." Quote. He helped her to her feet. She swayed, barely able to stand. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. She was light as a child, her head falling weakly against his shoulder. "My name's Samuel Thornton," he said as he carried her outside. "I own the Triple T Ranch about 10 miles north. You'll be safe there." "Safe?" she repeated faintly, as if testing a word she'd long forgotten. "I have nothing. No money, nothing to pay you with. I'm not asking for payment." He settled her in the saddle and climbed up behind, one arm around her waist to steady her. She tensed, then slowly relaxed as they rode through the fading light. The wind had cooled, carrying the scent of rain and the whisper of distant thunder. By the time the lights of the Triple T glimmered on the horizon, the girl had fallen asleep against his chest. Samuel tightened his hold slightly, something stirring in him he hadn't felt in years. When they reached the main house, ranch hands paused from their evening chores, curiosity flickering in their eyes. Samuel ignored their looks. "Jake," he called to his foreman, "send someone for Doc Morrison. Tell him it's urgent." "Yes, sir," Jake replied without hesitation. Samuel carried the girl inside, up the stairs and into one of the guest rooms. His housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, appeared almost instantly. "Poor child," she murmured, clucking her tongue. "I'll draw a bath and find some clean clothes. You go on now, Mr. Thornton. This is women's work." Samuel hesitated, watching as Mrs. Chen bustled about tending to the girl. "Thank you," the girl whispered as he turned to leave. He nodded and stepped into the hallway, her faint voice still echoing in his mind. "I can't breathe." Those 3 words haunted him long into the night as the first drops of rain began to fall on the roof of the Triple T Ranch, marking the beginning of a storm and of something else he couldn't yet name. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, painting soft patterns across the guest room floor. The girl stirred, momentarily confused by the softness of the bed beneath her and the clean scent of lavender soap on her skin. For a fleeting second, she wondered if her rescue had been a dream, but the soreness in her wrists and the faint ache in her throat told her otherwise. A gentle knock sounded at the door before Mrs. Chen entered carrying a tray. "Good morning, dear. You need to eat," she said kindly, setting down a bowl of oatmeal, fresh bread, and tea. "Thank you," the girl said, her voice still raspy. Mrs. Chen smiled warmly. "Mr. Thornton asked that you come down when you're ready. He wants a word." After the housekeeper left, the girl dressed slowly in the simple brown dress laid out for her. It hung loose on her thin frame, but it was clean and soft. She caught sight of herself in the mirror. Clean hair, bruises fading, eyes still haunted. She barely recognized the reflection. When she descended the staircase, she found Samuel Thornton standing by the large window of his study, staring out over the sprawling ranch. He had traded his fine coat for work clothes, denim pants, a flannel shirt, and yet he still carried himself with the quiet authority of a man used to command. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing toward a leather chair near the fire. His voice was low, calm. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Much better, thank you," she replied softly. "And thank you for saving me." "You don't owe me thanks," Samuel said. "Just tell me your name." "Grace," she said after a pause. "Grace McKenna." He nodded slowly. "Well, Miss McKenna, Doc Morrison says you'll recover if you rest and eat. You're welcome to stay here until you're strong enough to travel." "I couldn't impose," Grace said quickly. "It's no imposition," Samuel replied, his tone firm enough to end argument. Then he added, "Now, tell me who did this to you." At once her shoulders stiffened. She looked down at her lap, fingers twisting in the folds of her dress. "They'll come for me," she whispered. "They always come back." "Who?" Samuel asked quietly. "The Carlyle gang," she said at last, her voice trembling. "Tom Carlyle and his men. They run a business out of Laramie, an employment agency they call it. But they lie to girls, say there's work waiting out west. Once you're in their hands, there's no way out." Samuel felt a chill creep through him. He'd heard rumors of such operations, innocent girls lured by false promises. But he dismissed them as frontier tales. Now the evidence sat trembling before him. "How did you escape?" Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I waited until they were drunk, took one of the horses and rode as far as I could. The shack I was in, it was where they caught me again. They said they'd leave me there without water until I begged to come back." Samuel's jaw tightened. "You won't have to face them alone again." Grace looked at him, uncertain whether to believe him. "You don't understand. They have friends, sheriffs, judges. They'll come with papers saying I belong to them." "Belong?" Samuel's voice hardened. "No one belongs to another person." Before Grace could answer, the sound of hooves thundered outside. Jake burst through the doorway, his weathered face grim. "Boss, 3 riders coming up the north road, asking about a runaway girl." Samuel rose instantly. "How far out?" Quote, "10 minutes, maybe less." Quote, "Have the boys go about their business," Samuel said, buckling on his gun belt, "but tell them to keep rifles ready." Jake nodded and hurried off. Samuel turned to Grace. "Go with Mrs. Chen. She'll take you to the root cellar. Stay there until I send for you." "I won't hide," Grace said suddenly, her eyes flashing. "I'm tired of running." "This isn't up for debate," Samuel said, his voice like iron. "Go." Jake appeared again and guided her from the room, despite her protest. Samuel stepped out onto the porch. The morning had turned gray, clouds rolling in from the mountains. His ranch hands moved quietly, pretending to work while keeping hands close to their weapons. Samuel stood near the gate, his thumbs hooked in his belt, every nerve alert. The riders appeared through the dust, a scar-faced man leading 2 others. They looked like men who lived outside the law, rough and restless. The leader, a broad man with greasy black hair, stopped just short of the gate. "Morning, friend," he said with a mocking grin. "Name's Bill Hartley. We're looking for some property that might have wandered this way." "This is private land," Samuel replied evenly. "No stolen property here." Hartley's grin faded. "Now you haven't even heard what we're looking for. A girl, about 20, dark hair, troubled in the head. Poor thing ran off from her family." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Samuel said. Hartley leaned forward in the saddle. "Mind if we look around?" "Wouldn't want you harboring a fugitive." "I do mind," Samuel said flatly. "You step 1 foot past that gate and you'll regret it." The younger rider, jumpy and eager for trouble, spat in the dirt. "You know who you're talking to, old man? Mr. Carlyle don't take kindly to interference." Samuel's ice-blue eyes met his without a flinch. "Then tell Mr. Carlyle that Samuel Thornton doesn't take kindly to threats." The air grew thick, tension coiling like a drawn wire. Hartley's hand drifted toward his gun, but the cold steadiness in Samuel's gaze made him hesitate. "This ain't over," Hartley said finally. "You're making enemies you don't want." Quote, "Then you'd best ride fast before I change my mind," Samuel replied. The 3 men wheeled their horses and galloped away. Dust rose behind them like smoke. Samuel waited until they disappeared over the ridge, then turned to Jake, who had reappeared beside him. "Bring Miss McKenna back to the house," he said, "and send a rider to Cedar Ridge. Tell Marshal Brennan I want to see him before nightfall." When Grace returned, her face was pale but determined. "They were Carlyle's men, weren't they?" "Yes," Samuel said, "but they're gone for now." Grace sank into the nearest chair, trembling. "You shouldn't have defied them. They'll ruin you for this." Samuel poured himself a stiff drink, the amber liquid catching the light. "Grace, I've already been ruined once. The only question left is what kind of man I choose to be now." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Inside, the room was silent except for the faint crackle of the fire. Two lost souls, both scarred by the past, both standing on the edge of something they didn't yet understand. And neither of them knew it yet, but the storm that was coming would change both their lives forever. The sky over the Wyoming plains turned a deep shade of gray, heavy with the weight of the coming storm. By the time Marshal Brennan arrived at the Triple T Ranch, rain was already falling in cold sheets, soaking the dirt yard and turning it to mud. Samuel met him at the porch steps, his face calm but his jaw tight. "They've already been here," he said. "I figured as much," the marshal replied, shaking the rain from his hat. He was a tall man, with kind eyes and a voice that carried quiet authority. "Carlisle's name has been whispered in every corner of this territory, but no one's ever had the courage or the evidence to stand against him." "Then maybe it's time that changed," Samuel said. Inside, Grace stood near the fire, wrapped in a blanket. Her face was pale, but her eyes were steady. "Marshal," she greeted softly. He nodded respectfully. "Miss McKenna, I've heard of what happened to you. I'm sorry you had to live through that." "I'm not the only one," she said. "There are more girls, dozens, maybe more than that." Brennan looked to Samuel. "If she's telling the truth, and I don't doubt she is, we're looking at one of the largest trafficking rings west of the Mississippi. But if we move against Carlisle without proof, the law will protect him." "Then we find proof," Samuel said, "whatever it takes." For the next few days, the Triple T became a fortress. Brennan's deputies arrived quietly, disguised as ranch hands. Samuel's men kept watch day and night. Grace, though still weak, helped where she could, writing down everything she remembered about Carlisle, his men, and the places she'd been held. On the third morning, word came from town. Jake rode in hard, his horse lathered and panting. "Carlisle's spreading talk," he said grimly. "Claims you kidnapped that girl Sam. Says she's a thief who owes him money. Got himself a judge to sign papers." "Judge Harwick," Brennan muttered. "Corrupt as a rattlesnake. I've been trying to catch him dirty for years." Grace's hands clenched at her sides. "He'll twist the law just like they always do, and he'll come for me." Samuel's eyes hardened. "Then he'll have to come through me first." That night the rain stopped. The air was still and thick, the kind of quiet that settled before violence. From the porch, Samuel could see lights moving along the north road, lanterns carried by riders. "They're coming," Jake said quietly. Samuel's men took positions. The marshal and his deputies stayed near the gate, rifles ready but hidden behind the corral fence. Inside the house, Mrs. Chen helped Grace upstairs, but the girl refused to hide. "I won't cower in the dark anymore," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "Not again." When Carlisle and his men reached the ranch, they came with more than threats. They came with false papers, a judge, and a sheriff too scared to stand against them. "Thornton!" Carlisle called out, his voice booming through the wet night air. "You're harboring stolen property. Hand her over, and we'll call it square." Samuel stepped forward into the lantern light, his face calm but his eyes burning cold. "Grace McKenna is a free woman. You'll not lay a hand on her." The judge beside Carlisle raised a rolled document. "This warrant says otherwise. Signed and sealed under territorial law." "Your law's rotten," Samuel said quietly, "and it dies here tonight." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Grace appeared on the porch, shoulders squared, chin high. "If it's me you want," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "then I'll speak for myself." Carlisle sneered. "Still got some fight left in you, huh? You'll regret that soon enough." Grace walked down the steps slowly, her dress whipping in the wind. "You want your silence bought? Then let's make a trade," she said. "I've got something you'll want even more than me." Samuel stiffened but said nothing. Grace's plan, hatched quietly the night before, was a dangerous gamble. Carlisle's eyes narrowed. "What kind of trade?" "Names," she said. "Dates, every judge, banker, and sheriff you've paid. I wrote it all down." If anything happens to me, the marshal will have it in his hands by sunrise." Carlyle froze, his smirk fading. "You're bluffing." Quote, "Try me," Grace said softly. The judge shifted uneasily in his saddle. The men around Carlyle looked at one another, uncertain. After a long silence, Carlyle spat into the mud. "You think you've won, girl. The law won't protect you forever." "Maybe not," Samuel said, stepping beside her, "but I will." Carlyle's jaw tightened. He turned his horse sharply and rode away into the darkness, his men following like shadows. When they were gone, the ranch exhaled as one. Grace's knees gave out, and Samuel caught her before she fell. "You shouldn't have done that," he said softly. "Yes, I should have," she whispered. "I'm done running." A week later, under Brennan's guidance, Samuel and Grace rode into Cedar Ridge to give testimony. The judge and Carlyle were both arrested that same night. Their ledgers and letters uncovered exactly where Grace said they'd be. Months passed. The trials shook the territory. The truth came out. Dozens of missing girls, countless crimes buried under money and lies. Brennan became a hero. Judge Harwick was sentenced to life in prison. Carlyle met the gallows. When it was over, Grace returned to the Triple T. The ranch bore scars from the battle, but it still stood strong. Samuel met her by the corral one cool morning, the sunrise turning the world gold. "You could go anywhere now," he said quietly. "California, New York. Start fresh." Grace looked out across the open land, her eyes soft. "I already started fresh," she said. "Here." Samuel smiled faintly, something unspoken passing between them, something deeper than words. They stood together in silence, the wind tugging gently at Grace's hair, the smell of sagebrush and earth rising with the dawn. After years of grief and fear, both of them could finally breathe again. "I can breathe," she whispered, almost to herself. Samuel took her hand. "So can I." And as the sun broke fully over the Wyoming plains, its golden light spilling across the land, the haunted rancher and the brave girl he'd saved turned toward a new beginning, one born not of rescue but of redemption.